Well, DNC Chair Tom Perez is defending a lawsuit against the Trump campaign and Russia.
We don't know when Director Mueller is going to act, and so this notion, and again, I don't want to ask him when he's going to act, and so we have to protect our rights. But secondly, we've done our homework. Over the course of the last year, we have seen, I think, a mountain of evidence of collusion between the campaign and the Russians to basically affect our democracy. I'm punching back not only for my colleagues, I'm punching back for democracy. That's what we believe in as Democrats. Elections should be fair. I understand people may agree and disagree, but you know what? We're fighting for them.
Kimberly, Mr. Perez wants a jury trial for this. Yeah. What are his odds?
Well, let's post it. Zero shot of that. I mean, look, but he's quite earnest and sincere in his total disregard for the president and for the president winning the election and being in the Oval Office. He is playing strong and aggressively to his base. That's what they want to hear on the far left. So he's got to go with that sort of like mantra, that rhetoric, etc., to be able to kind of hold his position, his place. And he's trying to like drum up support for midterm elections. And that's what this is about, you know, hence let the games begin.
Greg.
You know what? This guy should sue the moon while he's at it because he keeps howling at it. They should actually do the right. You know what they should sue? Anthony Weiner. He caused Comey to do the honorable thing and sound the alarm about the classified info on his filthy, filthy laptop. That's the person that helped elect Donald Trump. Wasn't Russia. It was Anthony Weiner, and thank God for Anthony Weiner.
He was like a sleeper cell.
Said that before.
I know.
Juan, what's your response? Do you support the lawsuit or no?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea because you know what? President Trump isn't doing anything to stop this from happening in the midterms or 2020s. And the question is it going to happen again? And you would hope that all of us as Americans would say, we don't want Russia interfering in our election.
Jesse, you have 2 seconds.
Obama never helped at either one. No, the Democrats have nothing left. They have no leadership. They have no money in the bank. All they have are boycotts, protests, and lawsuits.
Yeah.
And they're broke. And this is a fundraising ploy. And it's probably not even going to work.
I don't know how they're going to pay for it.
And now we're going to get all the discovery on the other side. They're going to go, okay, get it over on the other side.
Let's depose Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Well, moving on to more important things, maybe. It's a boy. Will and Kate introduce us to their new little prince up next.
Yay!
Time now for the absolute cutest edition of Kimberly's Royal News. Yes. Prince George and Princess Charlotte of Britain are now the proud siblings of a new baby brother. The world met the little prince earlier today, and he is unnamed for now. Perhaps they will consider the fine names of Greg, Juan, or a dark horse, Jesse. Fantastic. You know, this is not easy to balance. It's quite heavy. It's my Christmas present from Juan from years ago. So this was quite spectacular. Everybody loves a royal baby. They came out today. They both look absolutely fantastic. You can't even believe that she just had a baby, and I wonder what they're going to name, but they've been quite busy, Katie.
They've been very busy. She's amazing. She's beautiful. She wore that dress as a tribute to Princess Diana and her second child, I believe. So it's very sweet, and we wish them all the health and love in the world.
Absolutely. Skipping Greg. Jesse.
Well, I studied really hard for this segment because I think it has a lot of impact on regular Americans. The only thing I could come up with that was insightful is if you're the third son, you're the third in line for the throne, that's got to be the sweet spot. No pressure being the first in line. The second, you know, anything could happen to your older brother. Third, I mean, you can do whatever you want, you can misbehave, but you still have the trappings of the royal family.
You really did think about this.
I did. I
think
this
like,
is the, if I was to be born into a royal family, third. I'd go third.
Okay, so you would want to be
no pressure.
Third.
No pressure at all.
That's the way you roll. No pressure, but all the benefits.
All the
benefits.
Perfect.
Wait a minute. You are the first son.
Yeah, but I'm not
he
royalty.
He doesn't like it.
Oh, no, we think of you as royalty.
What would you want to be? Which one? The first, the second, or the third?
Well, I guess you want to be the guy, right? Take on, you know, big shoulders. Take it. You know, so this weekend was big for me because I heard that my first son is going to, and his wife are going to have a baby. So for me,
congratulations.
this is such great. I mean, it's wonderful. You got to look at it just as family. Even if they weren't royals, congratulations.
God bless. That's the thing. It brings us all together, right? Why not? You want to be happy for people.
And to tear us apart, here we go, Greg.
So, Greg, Greg, who has the utmost respect for the crown.
Yeah, I just would like to offer support to everyone at home who must endure these stories as if royalty reproducing is somehow an achievement.
As some people would say,
royals,
yes.
Kneel.
Please, Greg, I want you to kneel before me now, okay?
He is kneeling.
I am kneeling.
Oh, I
don't have to kneel. I'm standing.
Oh, God. Perfect. Kind show, isn't it? One More Thing is up next.
Time now for One More Thing. Kimberly.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm a big fan of boxing and American history, and President Donald Trump is considering a posthumous pardon for famous boxer Jack Johnson after actor Sylvester Stallone brought a story to his attention. You take a picture of him there. He was boxing's first black heavyweight champion, and in 1913 he was convicted of taking his white girlfriend across state lines, and he went to prison for a year. His career as a world heavyweight champion was subsequently destroyed by this criminal conviction, and then sadly he later died in a car accident in 1946. His great-grandniece, along with Senator John McCain and former Senator Majority Leader Harry Reid, have been pushing for him to be pardoned for years. So it's a story of triumph and tragedy, but it's not over yet. And President Donald Trump hopefully will pardon this fine American and put him back in the ranks where he belongs, of one of boxing's greatest.
Maybe Stallone could get him to pardon Cohen, right, One?
You never know. You never know.
Go ahead.
All right, take a look at this picture, folks. Now, that's a throwback. Yes, Democrats and Republicans gathered as one. The photo, 4 generations of American presidents and their wives, was taken Saturday at Barbara Bush's funeral in Houston. We have her husband, former President H.W. Bush, her son, George W., and his wife, Laura. The younger Bush has his arm around Hillary Clinton. President Bill Clinton stands behind them, and joining them is President Obama and his wife, Michelle, and current First Lady, Melania Trump. The only living presidents missing, Jimmy Carter, Donald Trump. This is one way American politics ought to be. One country, one family, one people out of many.
Nice picture. Missing Valerie Jarrett. She was president for a while.
Ow!
I think that's the Trump word.
Okay. Greg.
All right, it is time for this. Greg's terrible diet news. All right, as you know, I'm an expert on terrible diets. There's nothing worse than stuffed animals. Let's take a look at this dog. St. Bernard, he had to go in for what they thought was cancer surgery. His name's Maisie, by the way. 8 years old, brought him in, and they found it wasn't cancer at all. He had been eating teddy bears. Oh, we all know that teddy bears are lots of carbohydrates, and they don't digest easily, so I would say do not eat teddy bears, dog.
That's how you lost all your weight, right?
I did. I stopped eating stuffed animals. I'd go to the Toys R Us stuffed animal aisle and I just gorge.
Okay.
Oh my God, I got throw up outside, nothing but cotton.
Oh
okay, moving on. Greg knows what it's like to make a joke that people don't really like. Jay Feely, ex-NFL kicker, posed for a prom picture with his daughter and said this. Wishing my beautiful daughter and her date a great time at prom, but look, he's got a little handgun on the lower right seat there. Right. So people got mad at Feely, saying it was inappropriate. He actually had to apologize.
Everybody.
The daughter and the date were already in on the joke. So, I mean, there's the apology. Can you believe it? You actually have to apologize.
You have to apologize for everything now.
For everything now, right, Greg?
I do. I'm sorry about that.
Oldest dad joke in the book.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I have twins. I probably had a double barrel.
It's my turn. I went to Arizona 2 weekends ago to visit my family and to do a project, a conservation project with the Arizona Desert Bighorn Sheep Society. My family's been doing these for decades. So there I am in my safety gear with my glasses, my mask. And we built a 10,000-gallon water and catchment for the sheep so we can conserve their territory and the animals so they can live there and have a good life. There I am welding. I do know how to weld.
Wow.
Very slowly, but yes, I know how to weld. So you can see there the tanks, and then the final project is coming up at the end with the roof, as you can see. So great time with good people who are getting out there with their local community.
Do-gooder, aren't you? That's not how I would spend my free time. But, you know, everyone's different. Set your DVRs. Never miss an episode of The Five. Special report up next. Bret Baier.
Thanks, Jesse. This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Bret Baier in Washington on a very busy news day. 9 people are dead, more than a dozen wounded after a driver jumps a curb in a van in Toronto this afternoon. Plus, an intense manhunt comes to an end as police in Tennessee capture a man wanted for the murder of 4 people at a Waffle House. And right here in Washington, a rare moment as President Trump's pick for Secretary of State is up for a vote before a panel considering that nomination, and it is very close. The voting happening at this moment. Also at this hour, the President and First Lady welcoming the French President and his wife to Mount Vernon in just a few minutes as they prepare to talk about the future of the Iran nuclear deal and other big issues. We start things off tonight, however, with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge on what clearly looks like a planned terror attack in Canada. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Bret. Tonight, Canadian officials are calling it a major and complex investigation after a white rental van mowed down pedestrians during the lunch hour, leaving at least 9 dead and another 16 injured, many at a level 1 trauma center.
Toronto Police Service has mobilized all available resources, and I can assure the public all our available resources have been brought in to address this tragic situation and to investigate this situation.
At approximately 1:30 Eastern, the emergency calls started coming in that a van going about 40 miles an hour jumped the curb, ramming pedestrians and anything else in its way. Passers-by stopped on the spot, doing CPR on victims. The dead were covered with blankets. Witnesses described the incident as deliberate, with the vehicle traveling about a half mile along a major artery that runs north-south through the city of Toronto. After the van stopped near another major intersection, the suspect got out of the vehicle, brandishing a black object. Witnesses reported the suspect claimed to have a weapon before the police takedown. Canadian authorities have not identified the suspect, whether he acted alone, was part of a larger group, and no word yet on the motive. The terror group ISIS has called on its followers to use vehicles as weapons, and they did so with deadly effect in Nice, France 2 years ago, killing 87 people. If confirmed as terrorism, the Toronto attack would be one of the worst on North American soil.
It's a nightmare, man. I got to Young and Empress, and I seen a lady with her leg, and oh man, it's a gruesome scene. It's really bad out there. I couldn't believe what I seen, man. It was like, oh man, everybody, all these people on the streets getting hit one by one.
Toronto law enforcement is now working closely with Canadian federal officials. Canada's Minister for Public Safety, the equivalent of the Homeland Security Secretary, said there's no link between the incident and a G7 meeting also in Toronto at this point, Bret.
Catherine, thank you. We'll follow for some updates if we get them. This is another Fox News alert. This is just happening right now. The tide's nearly turned for President Trump's pick for Secretary of State. Within the past hour, CIA Director Mike Pompeo got more support he needed from senators, but it did not prevent him from a history-making rejection by the Senate Foreign Relations panel considering his nomination, in part because of an absence of a Republican senator, and a tie goes to a fail. It's how the Senate committee works. It doesn't mean that his nomination is coming to an end, however. Correspondent Rich Edson is live from Capitol Hill with the latest on that. Just a vote a past couple of minutes. Good evening, Rich.
Hey, good evening, Bret. And the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is still considering its next steps on how to get the nomination of Mike Pompeo onto the Senate floor here, where it is expected to succeed. But it's this issue of getting it out of the committee that's been such an issue. Now, we woke up this morning thinking that the nomination would not advance to this committee because Kentucky Senator Rand Paul was going to vote with the Democrats, and that wasn't going to be enough to get him out. Well, there was a change in that, and then we thought maybe he would get out of committee with what's called a favorable recommendation. But then one Republican senator is absent. Senator Isaacson is in Georgia attending a funeral. So now they're deadlocked at 10-10, throwing this all up. But the unexpected bit of news happened right before this business meeting with an unexpected tweet. Having received assurances from President Trump and Director Pompeo that he agrees with the president on these important issues, I have decided to support his nomination to be our next Secretary of State. He joins Democratic Senators Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Donnelly, and Joe Manchin in supporting Pompeo's nomination, likely enough to confirm him. The president tweeted this morning, quote, "Hard to believe obstructionists may vote against Mike Pompeo for Secretary of State. The Dems will not approve hundreds of good people, including the ambassador to Germany. They are maxing out the time on approval process for all. Never happened before. Need more Republicans."
A majority of Democrats continue their pointless obstruction to score cheap political points with their base as a willful attempt to undermine American diplomacy.
Democrats claim they oppose Pompeo because they say he'll fail to check the president's worst instincts.
I believe our nation's top diplomat must be forthright, and more critically, his past sentiments do not reflect our nation's values and are not acceptable for our nation's top diplomat. I believe the American people deserve better.
Republicans say Pompeo has the trust of the president, and note the Senate confirmed him as CIA director by a 66-32 margin. As a national security-focused nominee, they say Pompeo deserves confirmation, just as the Senate easily confirmed Secretaries of State for Presidents Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and their predecessors. Republicans say they're pushing to confirm Pompeo in the coming days. NATO hosts a meeting later this week for foreign ministers. Pompeo says he wants to be there. Officials will likely discuss the Iran nuclear agreement at that summit. President Trump's deadline on whether to withdraw from the Iran deal is less than 3 weeks away. Then, of course, there are the ongoing discussions to try to establish that meeting between President Trump and the dictator from North Korea, Kim Jong-un. That's something that Pompeo has been intimately involved in, traveling there during the holiday over Easter weekend. Republicans and Pompeo say they want to be able to do that as a confirmed Secretary of State leading that type of diplomacy. Bret?
Rich, just to be clear, so right now they're trying to figure out how to get this thing to the floor. Once and if it gets out of committee to the floor by a voice vote or whatever mechanism Corker chooses, the chairman, then they won't have a problem because of these Democrats who are going to vote for Pompeo.
That's right. They have three Democrats in total now who have said they will vote for Pompeo. Then they also have Kentucky Senator Rand Paul on top. So they feel as though they've got enough. They just have to get him there. There's some procedural issues right now in doing so, all contained within this committee in the meeting that's happening right behind us.
Some folks walking in right behind you. We'll let you do some work. We'll get an update later in the show. Thanks, Rich. The search for the suspect in a shooting at a Tennessee Waffle House is over. Police arrested Travis Reinking not far from his apartment just a few hours ago. Correspondent Jonathan Seri joins us live from Antioch with more on how it all came to an end today. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Brett. Until this afternoon, police say they had received no credible sightings of the suspect, but they continued to focus their search area here in Antioch, Tennessee, very close to the scene of the crime, this Waffle House you see behind me, and today their efforts paid off. Video from an eyewitness's smartphone shows suspect Travis Reinking in police custody minutes after his arrest in a wooded area near this apartment complex, not far from the Waffle House where a mass shooting claimed the lives of 4 people early Sunday morning in the Nashville suburb of Antioch.
Detective Williams saw his face and realized that that is the suspect we were looking for. At that point, Detective Williams drew down on the suspect. The suspect proned out. He told him to get on the ground. He got on the ground immediately, proned himself out.
Prior to Sunday's shooting, Reinking was no stranger to law enforcement. Back in his home state of Illinois, this 2016 police report explained Travis J. Reinking was delusional and believed the famous entertainer Taylor Swift was harassing him via stalking and hacking his phone. The following year, the Secret Service arrested him for refusing to leave a restricted area near the White House. That prompted authorities to seize Reinking's guns and place them in his father's custody, but they say the father eventually returned the weapons to his son, including the AR-15 used at the Waffle House.
It is possible if you transfer weapons knowingly to a person that is prohibited, so that could potentially be a violation of federal law.
3 people died at the scene and a 4th at the hospital. Police say it could have been even worse if it hadn't been for the quick action of a customer who decided to rush the gunman as he appeared to be reloading or unjamming his weapon.
I managed to get him with one hand on the gun, and then I grabbed it from him and I threw it over the countertop.
And after his arrest, Reinking immediately requested an attorney and made no statements to police. He faces 4 counts of criminal homicide. Brett?
Jonathan Seri in Tennessee tonight. Jonathan, thank you. As we mentioned earlier, at this hour, President Trump and the First Lady are hosting their first official state visit with French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife. We expect to see them do a photo op for the press shortly just outside Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington. But beyond all the pomp and circumstance, there are some very big issues for the 2 leaders to discuss. Correspondent Kevin Cork starts us off tonight on this visit from the White House. Good evening, Kevin.
Hey there, my friend. You're right. An historic night coming up for the president as they host their very first state dinner. Now, actually, that is tomorrow night here at the White House. But as you mentioned, they'll be dining this evening over at Mount Vernon, spending time together. But ahead of all the pomp and circumstance, Brett, comes a great deal of concern about some U.S. positions on some pretty delicate international policies. All this happening in a week that will certainly be marked by diplomacy and some major decisions. It's a return engagement for the French leader. President Emmanuel Macron coming to the U.S. just 9 months after he rolled out the red carpet for President Trump on the Champs-Élysées.
This state visit is very important for our people and very important for us.
However, this time, the two men will discuss a host of pressing issues that threaten to divide the longtime allies. From the Iran nuclear deal to the conflict in Syria, to what to do about North Korea's nuclear ambitions, transatlantic trade and tariffs, NAFTA, even the environment. All part of a high-stakes week of diplomacy that will also see German Chancellor Angela Merkel follow Macron's visit to the White House.
We have an incredibly good negotiator at the table for the United States, but what you do have are two leaders who have a great deal of respect for one another, who have a great friendship, certainly both have a great deal of interest in doing what is best for their country.
Macron's visit continues a tradition that spans generations, but one that is increasingly strained by a politically truculent president whose America First agenda is now forcing allies to reevaluate their approach to transatlantic policy, like the U.S.'s role, for example, in the six-party Iran nuclear deal.
What is the what-if scenario or your plan B? I don't have any plan B for nuclear against Iran.
Macron's comment drew a tweet from the Iranian foreign minister who said he was correct in saying there's no plan B. It's either all or nothing. Not surprisingly, the White House bristled.
We certainly think that there should be a better deal, one that actually is positive, that works, and we don't really typically look to the leadership in Iran to determine what our foreign policy is.
While some policy experts believe that Macron and later Merkel could come up with enough concessions to keep the president on board, they also warn that time for European leaders is running out.
The president has been very clear that if the Europeans don't agree to fix some of the flaws in the deal, that on May 12th he will tear it up. So we still have a month or so to go. I'm hopeful that the United States and our European allies can come to an agreement to close some of the holes in the deal.
Holes like finding an agreement on ballistic missiles and inspections and even some of those sunset clauses. And there is renewed hope tonight here at the White House, Bret, that perhaps the White House could be close to achieving some of those concessions, but they're not announcing anything just yet. Back to you.
Kevin Cork live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. And just moments ago, receiving word from Capitol Hill. As you look live there, Senator Corker wrapping up that hearing. Just got word that Senator Coons, who is shaking his hand there, giving him a hug. You know why he's giving a hug? Because Senator Coons offered, in a spirit of bipartisanship, to vote present, change his vote to present, which would allow this nomination to go from the committee to the Senate floor. We just witnessed the bipartisan hug there as they all file out of the room. Essentially what this means was the vote was tied 10-10. They were stuck. Coons changed his vote to present instead of no, and now the nomination of CIA Director Mike Pompeo to be Secretary of State goes to the Senate floor, and they do have enough votes. Let's bring in our senior political analyst, Bret Hume, with this breaking news happening. Bret, your thoughts on this and the whole kind of moment that this was, getting a Secretary of State nomination out of the Foreign Policy Committee?
Well, I think, Bret, that they had a number of options. They could have re-voted after Johnny Isaacson got back from his funeral. They could have had another meeting and voted again. It could have been reported out of the committee with an unfavorable recommendation, which gets it to the floor, unless Democrats wouldn't go along with that, which would seem a little odd. But I think what happened is about as good an outcome as you could expect for the Republicans and for this nominee under the circumstances. But it's characteristic of the Senate, kind of at its best, that a member of the other party Coons will almost certainly vote no on the floor. But allowing the nomination to proceed for the full consideration by the Senate is pretty much in the tradition of the way the Senate is usually operated. So I think it's a good development all the way around.
You just saw Senator Paul leave the committee room there, Bret, and obviously he had a change of heart after meeting with the president and also meeting with CIA Director and nominee Pompeo.
Well, I think in the case of Rand Paul, he's idiosyncratic. He's one of a kind. He votes what he considers to be his conscience. In this case, however, I think, he must have had in the back of his mind that Donald Trump is popular in the state of Kentucky, where he hails from, and that if his vote were the decisive vote that actually had the effect of killing the nomination, which I don't think would have happened, but if it had been, that would have been problematic for him. So he gets treated to a meeting with the president and a meeting with nominee Pompeo, and he gets some bland assurances from Pompeo that he will support the president's policies. How could he do otherwise? And changes his vote so he can go home and say, well, I extracted these promises and now I'm satisfied, and presumably his constituents will be happy and he doesn't have anything to worry about.
Yeah. What does this say, though, Bret, about where we are in that you have this nominee, who's a CIA director who just got back from Pyongyang, meeting with Kim Jong-un, as the delicate dance of getting this meeting potentially with the president and the North Korean leader is still being worked out. Having this issue and obviously kind of a speed bump along the way to confirmation.
It is very much, Bret, a sign of the times. We live in an age of partisanship at a level that I've never seen before, and I've been doing this around Washington for about 40-some years now, and I've never seen anything quite like this. I mean, you had Democrats know perfectly well that Mike Pompeo, on the face of it, is perfectly qualified. He's served in the Congress for a long time. He has glittering academic credentials. As CIA director, you don't have any real objections about him there. He's clearly qualified. As you note, he's been engaged in these negotiations, very important negotiations with North Korea already. And you had things like Jean Shaheen, the Democratic senator from New Hampshire, saying she was going to vote against him because of his position on abortion. That's almost laughable at any other time, but that is where we are. Profound partisanship and a constituency for many of these Democrats who will be satisfied with nothing less than all-out opposition to Donald Trump and every single thing he does, even if these things are otherwise would normally go forward without objection. It is said of Donald Trump that he has stepped all over all kinds of norms in our country, and perhaps he has. But he has induced his opponents to do the same thing. And this behavior toward this nominee is but one example of that.
Well, that's right. And last thing, as we look at this state visit by the French president and his wife, obviously they'll have this big state dinner. There are no Democrats invited to that state dinner. That seems to be a first as well.
Yeah, that's another norm that has been ignored. I think that's regrettable. But I would say this about the relationship with Emmanuel Macron. He is an important ally for this president. And, we've had a long alliance with the French going back to the Revolutionary War. And it is stood for a long time, but it has not been untroubled. And you may remember, Bret, what fits the French gave Colin Powell as he was trying to round up support in the UN for a second resolution to authorize the Iraq War. And the French foreign minister was trailing him around and arriving everywhere he'd just left in the country to try to talk people out of going along with the U.S. So the relationship has had some serious problems in recent years. And the fact that it seems so strong now, despite some obvious disagreements, the Paris Climate Treaty being one of them, and of course the resolution, the Iran nuclear bill being the other. It is still an important achievement for the president that he seems to have come to this relationship with one of our most important European allies at a time when the president can use whatever support in Europe he can get.
Bret, it's always good to have you on, especially on these days, for your expertise. Bret, thanks.
Well, thanks, Bret.
Your tax dollars hard at work, and yet the math just does not add up. Coming up, how the government is spending your money, and then some, plus an update on North Korea after the break. Relatively quiet day on the markets today. The Dow dropped 14. The S&P 500 was up a fraction. The Nasdaq lost 18. Each year, the typical American household pays roughly about $26,000 in taxes. But what is the government spending your hard-earned money on? National correspondent William Lajeunesse takes a look from Los Angeles tonight.
The federal government doesn't just print money to stay in business, it borrows it. And members of Congress, eager to be reelected, don't seem willing to do much about it. This year, Washington will collect $26,000 per household, but spend $33,000. That $6,800 gap is what Congress puts on a credit card, according to OMB budget figures. More than a third goes to Social Security and Medicare. A typical couple retiring today pays $500,000 into Social Security, but will take out $600,000 in benefits. Medicare, $140,000 in, 420,000 out, according to an Urban Institute study.
We would have to more than double families' taxes just to pay the benefits that have been promised.
Congressional generosity also extends to many social programs, food stamps, Medicaid, welfare, $6,000 a year per household. The military, more than $5,000.
I think it goes to like the Army and like a bunch of politicians' pockets.
Not exactly, but after decades of overspending, interest on the national debt is 7% of the budget, almost $2,500 a year per household.
Interest is the ticking time bomb. You have soaring deficits and interest rates that are about to go up.
The rest of your $33,000 pays for veterans, federal pensions, Homeland Security, education, the FDA, highways, and foreign aid.
It's really difficult when seniors are going to spend 1/3 of their adult lives in taxpayer-funded retirement, and we're squeezing out every other priority that goes to those under the age of 65.
So how does the Republican Revolution of '94, the Tea Party of 2010, become the do-nothing Congress of today? Well, one problem, experts say, is Congress not only votes on 1/3 of the budget that is discretionary, 2/3 of spending is on autopilot. With 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day, it's easier to ignore the problem than tackle it. Bret?
William, thank you. Out with the old and in with the new. That's the idea behind one congressman's plan to drop House and Senate members' salaries to just $1 a year after 12 years of service. Florida Congressman Francis Rooney believes the legislation will bring fresh ideas and make lawmakers more independent. Joins me now to discuss this. Good evening, Congressman. Term limits without going through the constitutional amendment process.
Everybody knows that it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to amend the Constitution. Yet there are 12 bills up just to do that with 90 sponsors. Now we can find out if those folks want to fish or cut bait.
Why are you doing this?
I'm doing this because I believe term limits are important. I believe the citizen legislator principle of Cincinnatus and Thomas Jefferson are what are important to our country, important values to our country. I think that rotating out more legislators would keep things fresh, getting more new ideas, keep people responsive to the people.
All right. You write that you have 7 co-sponsors, Congressman, introduced this Thomas Jefferson Public Service Act. It means effectively putting term limits in place without amending the Constitution, reducing the salary of an elected member of Congress to $1 a year after they serve 6 consecutive terms in the House or 2 consecutive terms in the Senate. Here's Bill Nelson from Florida about working hard.
I am now the ranking Democrat, and if we get the majority, we'll be the chairman. It takes time to work up through the seniority system, so I would think that that's particularly important to Florida.
So what about that argument that it takes a while to know how to get around this place, and maybe this artificial cap is not the right cap?
Well, first, I kind of resent the elitist paternalism that Senator Nelson and the Brookings Institute and some of these people say that the people that are elected by the people can't operate effectively for the people who elected them. That's what our country's built on, is an electoral republic. So I think that we should put our trust in the people and the people that get elected. And in seniority, at a time of globalization, technology, Twitter, Facebook, I mean, come on, this seniority is an anachronism.
All right, but what do you say to the people who look at your bill and say, okay, so you are enabling the rich people to all run because they could go with the $1 a year, and it's all rich people who are running for Congress and Senate.
It's a logical point, but what I believe, and I believe this very firmly, that were the culture of the citizen legislator to take effect, 12 years, over 99% of the legislators are doing the 12 years and leaving on to some other job. Any old rich guy or lady that wanted to stay on and do that is going to be such an outlier that they would be roundly and vigorously opposed, and quite frankly should be.
Here's something from your leadership in the House and the Senate on this issue.
I've watched states do it, some it failed at and some it worked at. I think the most important term limit you have is at the ballot box, and we've got to show that we can actually work and solve the problems.
I would say we have term limits now. They're called elections, and it will not be on the agenda in the Senate.
Your reaction?
Well, that's why 86% of the American people want them. And I'm a business guy, so I figure if 86% of my customers want something, my job is to figure out how to get it for them.
So the prospects of moving this forward, what do you think they are?
Well, I don't know. We're going to find out if people really want to fish or cut bait. I mean, there are 90 co-sponsors on the 12 term limit by amendment bills. The Freedom Caucus guys, a lot of them have talked about term limits, and several of them are my co-sponsors. A lot of freshmen have talked about term limits bills. Some of them are my co-sponsors. And then there's something called a term limit caucus. Let's see what they want to do.
And you think that this bill, if it passed, could get through legally?
Yeah, the bill people in the House researched it and said, yeah, Congress has the ability to set its own pay. So it's basically the effective practice of term limits without having to amend the Constitution.
Congressman, we'll follow it closely, and thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me on, Bret.
Mitt Romney will face a primary in Utah after coming in second at the Republican Party state convention Saturday. Congressman Mike Kennedy bested the former Republican presidential nominee by just 57 votes. Both men are seeking the GOP nomination for the Senate seat to replace retiring Senator Orrin Hatch. Up next, President Trump is getting ready for historic talks with Kim Jong-un, and both sides are posturing ahead of the visit. We'll look at that, plus update you on that Pompeo nomination. As we reported earlier, a wild afternoon on Capitol Hill over the Senate panel considering the nomination of CIA Director Mike Pompeo to be the next Secretary of State for President Trump. What began as the committee most likely voting against the recommendation turned late in the day to being cleared by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. But then the vote ended in a tie because of a Republican absence, which meant the recommendation automatically failed. Then Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Corker worked to get a Democratic Senator, Chris Coons from Delaware, to vote present, thereby getting the nomination to the Senate floor, even though Coons opposes it. And in a full Senate vote, Pompeo has enough votes as of tonight to be confirmed. Well, in just weeks, President Trump is set to meet face-to-face with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And as both sides ready for an historic meeting, concessions are already being made. Correspondent Jillian Turner reports.
Right now, I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism.
The Trump administration's gearing up to face off against dictator Kim Jong-un in just a few weeks. The first time an American president has agreed to meet with the head of the North Korean regime. South and North Korean leaders plan to meet this Friday to hammer out some ground rules for the historic Trump-Kim summit. And Washington's laser focused on the outcome of this interim meeting. Even some senior lawmakers are offering advance team advice.
This has been going on for 25 years, and obviously Kim Jong-un has learned about public relations and is setting it up well for him.
Kim's already announced some major concessions over the weekend that in the past the international community would have deemed nearly impossible. Effective April 21st, the North says it will cease nuclear testing, seize launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles, close a nuclear testing site as a guarantee of transparency. And Kim even floated the possibility of releasing 3 long-held American hostages. And just today, a brand new concession from the South Koreans in return. They've silenced the towers of loudspeakers that had continuously pumped anti-North messaging across the border for the past 2 years.
The sound you hear, well, that's South Korean music, propaganda essentially being blasted back into North Korea. North Korea right over my shoulder. The mountains in the distance, it's estimated that North Korea has about 1,500 artillery pieces positioned in those mountains, hidden.
All this is adding up to what may be a major diplomatic thaw that just a few weeks ago seemed impossible. Administration officials say right now President Trump's focused on setting up preconditions for Kim. They say he wants Kim to dismantle his nuclear program before the U.S. commits to any sanctions relief. Keep in mind, President Trump has many points of contention with President Obama's nuclear deal, but his main criticism has long been that the Obama team missed an opportunity to demand concessions from Iran before agreeing to sit down across from them at the negotiating table. Bret?
Jillian, thank you. One of the world's most wanted men is apparently still alive. ISIS leaders announced in a video that the terrorist leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is still overseeing ISIS operations. U.S. intelligence chiefs believed al-Baghdadi was severely wounded during air raids in Syria in February. A counterterrorism source now says they are looking for more evidence that al-Baghdadi survived that attack. Up next, the panel weighs in on the biggest foreign policy issues facing the president. But first, beyond our borders tonight, a violent attack by the Taliban kills 14 soldiers and policemen in western Afghanistan Monday, just a day after nearly 60 people were killed in a bombing that targeted a voter registration center. ISIS is claiming responsibility for the attack in Kabul that also wounded more than 100 others. The latest violence coming as the U.S. and Afghan troops have been conducting counterterrorism operations and airstrikes all across Afghanistan to try to root out ISIS there. The suspect in the 2015 attacks in Paris, along with an accomplice, were found guilty of attempted murder in a Belgian court today. Salah Abdeslam and an accomplice were both given a 20-year sentence for shooting at officers during a raid in Brussels. Abdeslam is being held in France, waiting to go on trial over the Paris attacks that killed more than 130 people, although a date for that trial has not yet been set. And it's a boy. For Prince William and Duchess of Cambridge, the couple's Kensington Palace office announced the birth of their third child this morning, and then you saw the video that made its way around the world. The fifth in line to the throne weighed in at a healthy 8 pounds, 7 ounces. No name yet for that baby boy. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
Deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered in. In the event we are not able to reach a solution working with Congress and our allies, then the agreement will be terminated.
What is the what-if scenario or your plan B? So my point is to say, don't leave now the JCPOA as long as you have not a better option for nuclear.
Obviously, this would be a very bad precedent that if the United States sends this message to the international community, that the length or the duration of any agreement would depend on the duration of the presidency.
Well, talking about the Iran deal there, and that will be talk between President Trump and the French President Macron, who arrived here in Washington today. Also arriving at the White House, came in at Joint Base Andrews with his wife there, and then arrived at the White House for talks with the president. They are currently, the two couples, together at Mount Vernon in the historic George Washington homestead, having a dinner tonight before the official state dinner tomorrow. What about this and foreign policy news? Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard. Dan Ball is national political correspondent at Washington Post. And Charlie Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times. Dan, it is a big visit. It's obviously the first state visit, official. And what do you think both sides are looking for out of this visit?
Well, I think clearly President Macron has come on a mission to try to talk the president into staying in the Iran agreement. The Europeans are very much alarmed that the president could pull out of this. He's signaled that he's likely to. May 12th is the deadline in which he's got to either recertify the agreement or decide to pull out of it. We know that the team that used to be around him kept him from doing that. We don't know where the new team is going to end up, but Macron is here to argue that they are trying to work out some arrangements and some agreements that will satisfy the president's concerns and keep him in it.
Yeah. And you think that's possible, Steve?
I think it's possible. Look, the Trump administration has been pushing a plan in bilateral discussions with Great Britain, Germany, and France, seeking to stay in the deal, calling for additional snap inspections of military sites, additional snapback sanctions, something that would have a bite with Iranian noncompliance in the deal. This has been under discussion for 6 weeks, maybe longer. The question is whether Germany will agree to it. France has been pushing. France and the United States are in very similar position on this stuff. Great Britain is, I think, a little harder. Germany's really been difficult. And I would imagine that President Trump and Macron will spend some time talking about how to get Germany aboard this new plan, even if Russia has already declared that they won't be part of anything other than the existing deal.
Charlie.
You know, I think it's an interesting situation. Macron has I think, is working well with Donald Trump. He's figured out that if you kind of listen carefully to what he says and sort of ignore some of the unusual, the impolitic style things that Donald Trump does, that you can actually get somewhere with it. One of the things I admire about what Trump has done here is obviously he campaigned on the promise that he was going to tear this thing up on day one. He hasn't yet. He was prevented from, talked out of doing that. But yet again, you're looking at a situation where Donald Trump has sort of multiplied the moving parts. whether it's with the tariffs, whether it's with the negotiations in North Korea, whatever. You have a lot of moving parts, and when you have a lot of moving parts, there's a lot more ways of sort of cutting the pie and getting deals that satisfy everybody at the table. And I imagine that is probably what they'll be talking about tonight at Mount Vernon.
You know, about the Iran deal, now you, as Steve mentions, have a different group around him. John Bolton, obviously opposed to the Iran nuclear deal. Pompeo is opposed to the Iran nuclear deal. I've pressed him on it numerous times. He said he finds zero beneficial. And now he is moving forward with this nomination. Speak about that, the fact that there was this political process. Right during this show, Chris Coons, voting present, enables a favorable recommendation from the committee onto the floor where he will have the votes to get through.
Yes, and he, he will be the next Secretary of State, and he has the president's ear in a way that Secretary Tillerson never did. He has earned a relationship with the president through hours spent doing the daily briefing and doing other things. He spent a considerable amount of time with the president. The president obviously trusts him. I think one of the interesting things, there was a little equivocation in his confirmation hearings about the Iran deal, which suggested he may not be quite where he was earlier on this, and so I think that it remains to be seen exactly how that will come out. But we know that he and Bolton have been much more hostile to this agreement than the prior team.
While we were talking, we got the video in from Mount Vernon of the French president and the president meeting there. They planted a tree that President Macron brought to the White House, and then they took a helicopter ride, Marine One, around the monuments in Washington. And then here they are arriving at Mount Vernon, and he's obviously giving a little instructional about Mount Vernon there to the French president, and they will have dinner together, the two couples, before the big official dinner tomorrow night. Steve, it is amazing to see the relationship that has developed since President Trump's visit to Paris.
Yeah, you remember that handshake and all of the scuttlebutt that surrounded that. Really interesting interview with Macron yesterday by Chris Wallace, making some news, I think, on a couple of different fronts. I think Charlie's right. The French president has taken the time to listen to Donald Trump and to understand how to play the president. I mean, to appeal to the places where President Trump needs appealing, in much the way some Republican lawmakers have done. And he, I think, keeps his criticism usually private, doesn't go around broadcasting, it doesn't go around taking shots at President Trump. He's got a difficult balance to strike. I mean, Donald Trump is not popular in France. He's not popular in Western Europe generally. So he's got to be careful not to seem like he's being a toady to President Trump, but at the same time, or boasting about his success in persuading him on Syria, for instance, but at the same time appealing to the president.
Let me play the soundbite from Macron on Syria, talking to our own Chris Wallace in Paris.
We will have to build the new Syria afterwards. The day we will have finished this war against ISIS, if we live, definitely and totally, even from a political point of view, we will leave the floor to the Iranian regime, Bashar al-Assad and these guys, and they will prepare the new war.
So how much influence he has over Trump foreign policy?
I think that was a mistake for him to say that, because talking about rebuilding Syria, you want to get people running for the hills here. That's the way you do it. You talk about killing ISIS and destroying ISIS. That's a lot more appealing. But I do think it's sort of a nice moment to stop and reflect. You have the French president and the American president at Mount Vernon tonight. And to think of the truly amazing things that have happened, between whether it's Rochambeau and General Washington planning for the siege of Yorktown, or the Marquis de Lafayette coming to visit Washington during the war. It's a pretty neat thing to think about what's going on the banks of the Potomac right now.
It really is. We are going to take a break here, but we have some breaking news that George H.W. Bush is in critical care, admitted to the hospital. We have feared that as he said goodbye to his wife, former First Lady Barbara Bush, at that funeral over the weekend. We'll take a break here and get the latest and bring it to you on the other side.